Good evening and welcome to our fourth lecture. Before we start with tonight's presentation, I have sent every one of you an invitation to a new established Yahoo group. We had talked in the two earlier groups today about this, and everybody seemed to be more or less in favor of having a place where you can present problems, talk about things that concern you, share maybe pictures, and you do not need to participate in this Yahoo group. I am well aware that this is to some people a nuisance. But if you want to, please sign up, introduce yourself, and get started. It may be just a wonderful place to connect and to have people and to meet people that are with you in this course. The other thing that I would like to do today, I just found this afternoon a picture that I really like, and that is this one here, and it goes a little bit with what we talked about last week, and I haven't seen anything like this before. This is from the Equine Distal Limb, an excellent book that is a little bit expensive, but for those of you who are really interested, the cheapest place I have found was at Walmart, from all places. It runs at Amazon, I think, $260 something, at Walmart $178 or something in that neighborhood. You can order it online. This shows here in this picture, it shows the hoof capsule here. Unfortunately, with a shoe attached. This always baffles me why an anatomy picture shows something with a shoe attached, but that's the way the cookie crumbles, I guess. And then we have directly under the hoof capsule, the lamina corium, also the coronary corium, and when I take all these marks away again, you can see here the bulge of the coronary corium, how it makes this wall. And then we have here the coffin bone, and just in case if you are a little bit confused what this here is, why this looks so strange, this is part of the lateral cartilage about which we will talk next time. But I just thought that this was a wonderful picture to once again show the parts that we talked about so much last time, the hoof capsule and the lamina and corium and coronary corium, sorry. So this was just a little bit repetition about last time. This time we're going to talk about the blood supply in the hoof and tendons, and a little bit about ligaments, but mostly about tendons. And then we have one more anatomy lecture next time, and after that we're going to get to more visual things like hoof capsule from the outside and how's the hoof formed and all these good things. When you look at this drawing here, you see that the blood supply in the horse is referred to in the hoof as the capillary beds in the periphery. And indeed, the blood supply in the hoof is very far away from the heart. And I think in this case the heart is a little bit oversized in this drawing. But we have, like everywhere else, we have arteries and veins. Arteries carrying blood from the heart to oxygen-rich blood from the heart into the body, and veins that return the blood to the heart, where it gets all cleaned up again, together with the lungs. So, to come to what really interests us, the blood supply in the hoof. This is a picture from Chris Pollitt, University of Queensland in Australia. This picture has made it so often around the world. It's good that it is digital, otherwise it would be all faded by now. You see here coming in on the upper right the digital arteries that supply the hoof with blood, and these digital arteries branch off to the front to supply the coronary bulge with blood, to the back to supply the heel area with blood, and then what is not so good to see is the blood supply to the lamina corium here in the front. And what is even harder to see in this, but we get plenty of good pictures later, is the circumflex artery that goes around the circumference of the coffin bone. Not shown here, but it is there. What you do have here, however, is a relationship to all the bones that are laying underneath and the hoof capsule, which makes it a little bit easier to picture all of this. That's why I chose this picture in particular. This here, you remember we had some slides the last time and the time before where a gentleman in Germany has made paper-thin cuts from the hoof and put them between plexiglass. This same gentleman has made these casts, these plastinates, and it shows beautifully how the digital artery comes in from the top, supplies blood all around the hoof into every region with its various branches. There is this coronary bulge blood supply. This is rather big here, and the blood supply to the lamellae of the lamina corium here on the bottom part. What you cannot see so well here again is the circumflex artery, but you can see it a little bit here that surrounds the distal border of the coffin bone. This is another plastinate from the same source. Digital artery coming in from the top, supplying the coronary bulge here with blood that supplies the heel from a special branch, and then supplies the lamina corium, which in turn supplies the circumflex artery. And if you want to picture this here, the hoof wall would be here, going all around here, and this would be your sagittal cut of the hoof wall, maybe a little bit straighter. So you can see how this fits perfectly in here and makes then with the heel a fairly nice hoof. So there you have it. This is a schematic from the glass horse again, where you see the hoof from behind, digital arteries coming in here, and these digital arteries are rather thick. If we go back to this, you can see how thick they really are. It's amazing. And when we take cadaver hoofs apart to study them, they are usually empty of blood already. And you can see very much the hollow in that blood vessel when you cut through it. I have a picture later where you can see this very well. So they are really almost thicker than what they are here in the schematic. One branch or two branches going off to the front, supplying the front of the hoof with blood. One branch here connecting in the back. Other branches supplying the heel of the hoof and the bottom of the hoof. The circumflex artery supplying the solar corium with blood. This is also from the originator of the glass horse, Dr. Andrew Parks from the University of Georgia. Here you see the digital arteries coming down into the lower limb on both sides of the sesamoid bones, supplying the area of the long pastern bone with blood with various branches, then coming further down, supplying the back of the hoof with an extra branch. This yellow thing here is the lateral cartilage. I'm not quite sure why they put it in here. Maybe to show that some blood supply runs on the outside of the lateral cartilage, some blood supply runs on the inside. However, the digital artery enters here then the coffin bone and forms the terminal arch in the middle of the hoof. Again, the coronary corium is supplied with blood here and filters down into the lamella. The blood vessels filter down into the lamella corium and come out of the lamella corium again to form the circumflex artery, which again is pretty big. And this whole area is enormously vascular. One of the latest developments in diagnosing hoof problems are these so-named venograms. What happens is the horse gets, I think, mildly sedated and then gets injected into the digital artery with a dye that shows up in the digital X-ray. And you can see here again these huge digital arteries coming down from the top, branching off everywhere. And in reality these branches are finer than what you can draw them. Forming here in the front the terminal arch, you can't see this all that well, but you can see part of the circumflex artery. And you can see very well the short pastern bone and the coffin bone lying here inside this web of blood vessels. This is a slightly better venogram, little bit more articulate, I think. I just found this as well this afternoon. It's sometimes tough to find these pictures, but they are around. Just putting them all together in one place. And what you see here is the digital arteries coming down from the top. This is a anterior, posterior, front to back venogram. What you see here in the back is the navicular bone. It all shines through. And here we have the venous plexus. The veins, the venous return, is in one school thought as being facilitated by the hoof mechanism, and the school thinks or teaches that because of the movement of the hoof capsule, the blood in the veins is returned to the body with this moving of the hoof capsule. Therefore, the scroll also speaks of 5 hearts that the horse has, 1 actual heart and 1 in each foot, which justifies the hoof mechanism in itself. Dr. Bauke, however, says that the veins in the horse's leg and nowhere else in the animal kingdom period, is different, and those veins actually move the blood themselves up the leg. That is what he found in his research. I have no opinion either way. This is information I give you. In general, for trimming, it makes no difference how the blood gets back to the heart. It does make a little bit of difference maybe if we try to explain hoof health, but you can explain it either way. The hoof mechanism is important, but maybe not for blood pumping. I don't know this. I'm not a researcher. One of my favorite things is I'm always saying I'm just a trimmer. So, but this is the, without question, the venous plexus. This whole area sits right above the coronary band and returns the blood back to the body. This is again from the glass horse a drawing or schematic, and it shows the arteries in red and the venous return in blue or gray. Usually it is shown in gray this time, in blue. This time it's in gray. You can see here the digital artery comes in here behind, moves over, comes out here again, goes back in. We've talked about this a little bit previously. The front of the hoof, the lamina corium, is supplied with blood, and the circumflex artery hugs the circumference of the coffin bone on the bottom. This is again a picture from Cheryl Henderson, and this shows you how thick this circumflex artery is in reality. In general, when we take a hoof apart, it's not always coming apart this nice. Actually, the coronary bulge the hoof horn came away here rather nicely, and in the upper part of the lamina corium it came away as well, but then it has a little bit of problem here, and this just happens when you pull these hoof capsules off. They're so incredibly hard to get off, and you have to use quite a bit of force, and wherever you have some freezer brand or some destruction of the tissues, it just rips off. But what you can see here is the circumflex artery and some branches that feed it coming out of the lamina corium, and it goes all the way around. This is another venogram, and what I like about this is that the hoof capsule here is shown with a marker that you can really see how far the hoof capsule is out here. This is all hoof horn, and how thick the blood supply here in the back is, which is really important later on when we try to understand why there is no blood supply in the front. The horse is founded but isn't quite hurting so much, but it seems to be toe walking more and more, and seems to have heel pain. This all goes hand in hand. Somewhere there is, you have to strike a middle ground, but remember, there are branches of the digital artery that supply the heel regardless of what happens in the front. And at this point, I like to talk a little bit about what role the blood supply plays in the hoof, not only in terms of transporting nutrients to the hoof, which is certainly extremely important, but it also transports something else to the hoof, and this is the so-named ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and this ATP restores the ability of the nerve to fire. When a nerve ending fires, the horse will feel. This may be a feel as, oh, there is a sharp rock, or this may be a feel as there is a lot of pain. These feelings are varying. But if there is no ATP, because ATP circles in the body all the time, then the nerve endings cannot come to a resting point again. And if they cannot come to a resting point, they cannot fire again. So they will basically not give any feedback about what's happening in that area where the nerve is not functioning. So without circulation, you have not proper nerve functioning. And you can try this on yourself. Just go ahead and put a real nice rubber band real tight around your wrist and let it sit there for a little bit, and then you can actually stick a needle into your fingertip after a while, and you don't feel it, because if there is no circulation in your hand, there will be no nerve function in your fingertips, or very little. There's always some lower vessels that are still working in some way or form. But this is what happens to the horse, and this is really important to remember for pathology later. And it's also important to remember when somebody tells you what they want to do to the horse in terms of wedging or letting the heel grow higher and all these things. What I'm really trying to build here is a clear understanding of how the hoof functions, and a little bit also your rhetoric, how you can formulate this if somebody says to you, I don't believe that what you're saying is right. This is how I built my hoof world, by knowing a little bit about anatomy. I'm by no means an expert. I just have found a lot of good pictures and have learned to talk a little bit about it. But by knowing the anatomy and drawing the conclusions about trimming hoof function from the anatomy. And to me, this is a logic step. So here we have a magnification of this circumflex artery. What you see here is the tip of the coffin bone, right here. Again, this looks like sagittal cut, but it's not. It's a digital X-ray. Oops. And this here, this area here is the digital artery. It's rather a lot of blood supply in that area, as you saw in the picture from Cheryl Henderson. This is a picture from Dr. Bauker, Michigan State University. He is a hoof researcher. I think I have mentioned this now umpteen times, but I like to give people that have let me use their pictures credit where credit is due. And what he has simulated here is the arterial supply into the hoof, and what he is trying to show is that there is a channel on the underside of the coffin bone in which this arterial supply, this artery, runs. And this channel, we see it in the next picture. No, not quite the following one. But here is the same thing, and what you see here is this is the coffin bone, and this is the palmar process. Sorry, this is not the coffin bone, this is the navicular bone. This is the palmar process, and there is plenty of space for this artery to come in here. It doesn't come from the side, it comes from up here, but that isn't so easy to show. It's always a little bit difficult to photograph this right. And there's plenty of space. There's certainly tissues in this area, but not so many that this artery doesn't have space. And here, if I mark this up on the right side, this here is this channel we are talking about, where the artery runs in. This is the hole that it vanishes into, and the same thing is on the other side. The digital arteries are matched pair, and they actually connect inside the coffin bone here in the terminal arch, and they come through here and are well protected from being pinched off in this channel. The lamellarium is also very vascular, and here we have just a cross-section of one lamella, and the red is the arterial supply, the blue is the venous return, and the white are the lymph vessels in between. And every one of these lamellae has this blood supply, and not only every one of these, but there are running tiny little capillaries into every one of these little side fingers as well. And if you remember this cast from the German gentleman, you saw how extremely vascular this entire area is. This here is another cast made by Dr. Pollitt in Australia. On the left side you see the bone being inside these blood vessels, thick digital artery coming into the hoof, fairly thick circumflex artery, and lots of blood supply to the front of the hoof as well as the back of the hoof. And here they did the same picture, but they took the bones out, and then you can see fairly well the terminal arch here in the front, where the two digital arteries connect. And knowing this, that they connect here, has later on some stipulations when we talk about founder and when we talk about how much coffin bone a horse can lose before you really cannot save it anymore. And the terminal arch plays a big role in this. You have to hang in there for a few more lectures before we get to that. This is again a picture from Dr. Pollitt. On the left side, a fairly healthy hoof with all the blood supply coming down the leg here. These here are the digital arteries, and a lot of blood supply in the lamellarium, in the coronary bulge. It's all there, very interwoven looks almost like an armor around the hoof. In the picture on the right side, this is a founded hoof, and here you can see how in the front of the coffin bone, right below the coronary bulge, the blood supply is interrupted. And I remember many years back, probably 20 years back, I had the one and only horse I ever saw with founder before I got into hoof care. And I owned this horse. And the attending veterinarian at the time ordered him to have every day 3 times a shot of acepromycin. And he said that thins the blood and gets more blood to the front of the hoof, and that will help. That and hard bar shoes and pads and what have you. We ended up putting the horse down. It did not help. Today I have a pretty good idea why this horse got this, but at the time I had no clue, and I had no clue how to fix it. There was just no way. But his idea was actually right. He wanted to thin the blood to get more blood supply into this area. That basically concludes our talk about blood supply into the hoof, without which there would be no life, no regeneration. There would happen nothing in the hoof. It would just be that block of horn at the end of the limb that so many farriers seem to think it's just a piece of horn. I'm not quite sure what they're thinking. We now come to talk about tendons, and what the horse community is mostly concerned about is the deep digital flexor tendon, also here depicted as DDFT. In general, tendons connect bone to muscle, and they help the muscle to move the bone with this connection. So sometimes there are very short tendons between the muscle and the bone, and sometimes there are very long tendons. In the horse's leg, the tendons, the 2 major tendons or 3 major tendons are actually very long. The deep digital flexor tendon connects the coffin bone to a muscle way up in the leg, and I have a picture later on to show you how far up in the leg. And the other long tendon is the extensor tendon, which connects the top of the coffin bone on the extensor process to a muscle way up in the leg. This tendon puts the leg forward. This tendon supports the leg and brings it back with the muscle action. And then you can see here also the joint capsules again. We had talked about this, the navicular bone with its joint, with its cartilages. And we're going to talk about all these little ligaments in the next lecture, next Tuesday. In the lower leg, there is absolutely no muscle. I know they talk about itty-bitty muscles that they have found, and there's a little muscle fiber here and a little muscle fiber there. Again, not really important in general. This is splitting hairs, or somebody needs to, there's certainly people for whom it's important. For our purposes, it is not. We have here in the back the deep digital flexor tendon running over the sesamoid bones, first running over the navicular bone, then running over the sesamoid bone, running over the back of the knee, and then and only then connecting to a muscle. And then we have also a superficial flexor tendon and this becomes a little clearer in a moment, who is who in the back of the horse's leg. And then we have the extensor tendon that goes all the way above the knee to a muscle. And when this muscle here gets engaged, then the horse brings the leg forward. And when this muscle here engages, then the horse brings the leg back. It's that simple. But because there is no musculature in the lower leg, something has to happen with the blood supply here, because usually the blood supply and the venous return is helped, managed in part by the muscles. So by their function, it helps with the circulation. In the lower leg we have no muscles. This here, I put these two pictures side by side because it may show you a little bit easier how these tendons work in the back of the foot. This was to me a big mystery for quite a long time, and I have spent quite some time to figure this out, how this all works, and I'm still learning something every time. This here is again this huge digital artery, and I think here you can appreciate it, how thick it is. On the other side it is cut. To skin out a leg like this is not easy. This takes quite some careful preparation to get it this nice. And they cut, I don't know why they cut the digital artery here, but it shows how thick it is. And it's hollow, very much so. So what you see here is you have the deep digital flexor tendon attached to the bottom of the coffin bone in the semilunar crest of the coffin bone. And it runs over the navicular bone, which you see here in the right behind the deep digital flexor tendon, and it runs up on top of the short pastern bone and a little bit on top of the long pastern bone, and then it vanishes behind the superficial flexor tendon. And the superficial flexor tendon is attached here to the end of the long pastern bone and the top of the short pastern bone on both sides. And it kind of makes a V here under which the deep digital flexor tendon can hide, and it really only becomes deep from there on. You see the same thing here again in reality. This here, let me outline this and then I take it away again. This here is the attachment of the deep digital flexor tendon, of the superficial flexor tendon, sorry. And here we have all of this here is superficial flexor tendon. It's a rather strong structure. And this here, let me take this away, and then this here is the deep digital flexor tendon that attaches down here where the picture runs out to the semilunar crest of the coffin bone. And on the top of it there are some capillaries, some small blood vessels. But the tendon itself is a very fibrous tissue, and there is something about the tendon that also applies to bone. Both of those tissues, the bone is a tissue as well, can only heal correctly under careful weight bearing. You will not get a tendon with stall rest and no movement to heal correctly. The tendon has to have some careful weight bearing in order to heal in the direction that it is built, and that direction is this way. This is how the tendon heals. And if you put this horse in a stall and it has a problem, let's say here, and you don't move this horse, the fibrous connections in this tendon will not heal straight up and down and connect well again. They will heal something like this. And this makes scar tissue, and scar tissue is not necessarily very resilient when it comes to new stress again. So therefore, the logic thing about healing a tendon that is injured is to give this horse movement, even if he limps in the beginning. Careful movement, not to push him around, but allowing him to exercise this tendon on his own discretion, certainly without painkiller, because with painkiller he doesn't know what he's doing with his foot. And it's the same with you. If you have a sprain, it may be very, very painful, but the best way to fix this is to move it. I can say that from my own experience. I got sprains and breaks fixed much faster than the doctor's prognosis by not putting it in a cast, not putting it on rest, but moving it. So that is my story, and I'm going to stick to it. This is another picture that I just found, and I told you, and we can look at this real quick again, that the superficial flexor tendon that covers the deep digital flexor tendon from the long pastern bone on, it attaches to the long pastern bone and the short pastern bone. And when we look here at this picture, you see here this area is the superficial flexor tendon attaching to the long pastern bone and to the short pastern bone. This here is the deep digital flexor tendon. And it then goes up in here. Since this is sagittal cut, you can't see it very well, but it then goes here under the superficial flexor tendon. I thought this was another very nice picture that I may use this later again when we talk about other structures in the hoof. The other big tendon that we're concerned about is the extensor tendon that in the picture on the right shows how it attaches to the extensor process being here right behind it, about like this. And it is actually, which you don't see in this picture, it is a very thin and very flat tendon. You don't see it here, but you do see it here. If you follow this extensor tendon up here, you see how thin it is. And I'm going to take my marks away, then you can see it better. It's a real thin sheath, and it doesn't take a whole lot of tendon tissue to lift that leg. It does, however, when the horse gallops or comes down from a big buck or jump. It takes quite a bit from the deep digital flexor tendon to catch that. However, the deep digital flexor tendon is over-dimensional in the horse. You can hang a whole horse, the weight of a whole horse, on one deep digital flexor tendon, and that one tendon can carry the entire horse. It can carry about 1,200 pounds and more. In bigger horses, the tendons are bigger. So this is a structure that is a little bit overdone and can withhold quite some stress. However, humans can always fix everything that it breaks rather sooner than later. So you see here the extensor tendon, and then you see a little bit something here that looks like a tendon as well, and it is. And beginning of April, actually on April's Fool's Day this year, Jerry Schmidt and I took a leg apart, and we stumbled upon this structure which we were never told about. It was as if it was a secret. And this is named the lateral extensor tendon, and it belongs to the extensor mechanism. It is only on the outside of the leg. There is no opposite on the inside, and it attaches to the long pastern bone, and we saw it when we took the leg apart, and then we had to really hunt through anatomy books till we finally found an explanation for it. It aids the extensor tendon in extending that leg. And what you see here, these in light purple, this is the only ligament I want to talk about today, because it kind of connects everything here. This is a ligament. Ligaments connect bone to bone, and this ligament connects the long pastern bone over the fetlock joint to the cannon bone, and it's named the ligament branch of the suspensory, or the suspensory ligament. So it's on both sides of the long pastern bone and the fetlock. On the back here of this picture, you can also see once again the very substantial deep digital flexor tendon, and the not quite so substantial but still pretty thick superficial flexor tendon. And here you see the suspensory ligament on this side. In this picture, you see also something that only exists in the back of the foot. It is the annular ligaments. These are actually the other ligaments we have to talk about. The annular ligaments hold the tendons close to the bone, so they don't flip-flop around. And they are so kind of like a cover that hugs the tendons close to the bone. What you see in this picture here is in green is actually the tendon sheath. This is what the tendon runs in, so it can run rather smoothly. And here we have one more time all the structures spelled out. In the front, the extensor tendon going all the way up. You see here the lateral extensor tendon. It's not named here. That's why we miss it all the time. These are the branches of the suspensory ligament on both sides. And here we have the deep digital flexor tendon and the superficial flexor tendon running over the sesamoid bone and then straight up the leg. And this is, you can actually feel this on the back of the leg, and it is rather hard. On this picture, I would like for you to sit a little bit back and try to separate the 2 feet that are drawn here laying on top of each other. The black one, the black outline, is the outline of a foot that has a ground parallel coffin bone. You see here the palmar processes, the navicular bone, the extensor process, the toe line. Then you have in black the short pastern bone, the long pastern bone, the cannon bone, and the sesamoid bone. When you have a ground parallel coffin bone, this is how these bones stack up. And you also have here running the deep digital flexor tendon, or the tendon apparatus in the back of the leg, running in a certain way. Now, if that hoof does not have a ground parallel coffin bone, now we're looking at the red line, then everything in the structure in the leg shifts. The bones are stacked more on top of each other. They are not quite as, they are running totally different. They are stacked more upright. These are horses that have short pasterns and upright legs, not quite so much slope to the pastern. And you see that the navicular bone now sits higher, and the sesamoid sits higher, and therefore the deep digital flexor tendon, or the whole flexor apparatus, is pulled higher. You cannot give the tendon slack by raising the heel. It is impossible. The tendon is designed to be tight, and what makes the tendon tight is the muscle to which it is attached. And if you lift artificially by putting a wedge pad under the hoof, if you lift that palmar process, you will not get a slack in the tendon. You will get a tight muscle above the tendon. And you get rather cramped shoulders and cramped lower legs in the horse. These are horses that get very stiff and get very short gaits. But that is not the only problem in this setup. The other problem when you have this stacked up like that is circulation. As we have seen in one of the pictures, the circulation to the front of the foot is not as good anymore as it was with a ground parallel coffin bone. Now, this discrepancy here in this area, that is really making such an enormous impact, because the annular ligaments and the fascia that covers all of the tissues in these areas, they are all very, very tight connected. And if you ramp this up or let it grow up, everything pulls on these tissues because they're not separated. They all belong to each other. And what happens then, a little bit higher up, in the bone lecture, we talked about how the splint bone has a bony connection at the knee, but it has no bony connection at the cannon bone at its very end. And if this blue thing here is to be the tendon, the flexor tendon, if this flexor tendon is now pulled up higher than where it's supposed to be on a regular basis, it pulls all these tissues here, the connective tissues, with it. And it puts so much stress on the splint bone, which is connected to these connective tissues, that eventually you have a high incidence of fractures of the splint bone because you have high heels. or wedged up heels. This is not how this was supposed to be. No Mustang, no wild horse has a tilted coffin bone. They all have ground parallel coffin bones. And now we go from this to our, let me just take that down, to our glass horse. Again, wonderful program, can't recommend it enough. This is the hoof with the tendons, with the extensor tendon from the front. What's here in brown are joint capsules. Here we have the branches of the suspensory ligament. Here we have the lateral extensor tendon, the extensor process behind this fan of the attaching extensor tendon. And then when we turn it around, as long as I hold the mouse on it, you see here in the back the annular ligaments. And as soon as I let the mouse go, the annular ligaments go away. And then you see the deep digital flexor tendon. Again, the green is the tendon sheath or the bursas over which the tendons run. The bursa is a fluid-filled sac that makes the movement smoother. Behind here you see the navicular bone. And again, this is tendon sheath. Then the deep digital flexor tendon vanishes under the superficial flexor tendon and goes up the leg all the way, further and further, and then I run out of picture. But it goes all the way actually to the elbow, some parts of it. Here you have the splint bone free floating on its end, and this whole area is the fetlock. And you see with the suspensory ligament and the tendon being tight here with the annular ligaments, how this is all tied together. It's a very tight connection that isn't half as fragile as horse owners want us to believe it. They're always afraid of tendon injuries, but in my opinion, most tendon injuries are man-made. Through bad trimming, through bad shoeing, through bad horse husbandry in general. And that concludes today's lecture. And we're going to open it up for questions now.